we're taught it's better to give than to receive. It is wonderful to give. It is powerful to give. It is part of our nature to give. But if we don't receive, if we don't let in receiving, we have nothing to give. It really needs to be a flow in, a flow out. Because when you let it in, you have way more to give. You never get empty. You don't go dry. That's what I finally learned. And I learned part of that lesson during cancer treatment, because I had to learn to ask for help so there wasn't more on my child's plate than she already had.
Welcome to today's Heart of the Hustle. I am here with Dr. Lucette, and we're going to talk all things veterinary medicine, bankruptcy, and finding your true self. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about you.
So I'm a veterinarian, hence Dr. Lucette, right? But of course, doctor applies to a lot of different professions, really. So, and I owned my own practice for 22 years. And then through challenges, significant challenges, my passion began to evolve into more along the lines of helping others to learn what I had to learn the hard way. And so I became transformational mindset coach. I'm a 3-time international bestselling author and speaker, and just absolutely passionate about giving other people the tools to live their very best life that we don't get taught. We're taught to live from the outside in, and it's living from the inside out that actually gives us the resilience to triumph over whatever we have going on.
Yeah. So how did you discover that? So, I mean, obviously you must have started as a vet and then something happened. Tell us more about your story.
So really, I opened my own practice and I had, a family and my daughter, and there came a point where I had to leave the marriage, and it was not good and it was hard. I didn't ask for child support because it was best for us not to.
Sometimes you just need to leave.
Yes.
You're like,
yes.
I don't care if I got nothing. Yeah. I just got to get out of here.
I just got to. Well, and the other thing is that there would have been a fight over the child support. And I felt like over my business, and I felt like if I left with my business, we would be okay. And that's what we just needed to do that. And then 3 days after my divorce was final, I found a lump in my breast. And within 2 weeks, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I was facing 15 months of cancer treatment, multiple surgeries, chemotherapy, radiation. I ended up having 5 surgeries, and with no paid sick days because I was a professional and I owned my own practice, and no child support. So every time I stepped out of the business, we had no income.
That's one thing they don't talk about when you're an entrepreneur is, you don't get paid sick leave, and right. Those are the nice perks of being in corporate America. But of course you don't get to have your own business, right? Which has a lot of its own benefits too, right?
Right. So, and thankfully I did have insurance. Yeah, that was huge.
Wow. So that journey was 18 months, you said?
15 months.
Okay, 15.
But
wow.
It was a long time. And even though you have insurance doesn't pay for every time you step out of the business, And I was super blessed because I did have a really wonderful community around me. And they actually did a fundraiser when I was going through chemo that raised the most they'd ever raised. At that point in time, had really good. They did do fundraising. These older Aubrey farmers would cook out, and they would start the night before, and they did this, brisket and beans and all these things. And there was a silent auction and a live auction, and it, as God, the universe works, it was just enough, right, to really help us make it through and still have the business. And I worked a lot of days when I didn't feel, I had to miss on the days of chemotherapy and the day after. And then I did that on a Thursday and Friday and be back at work on Monday until the next round 3 weeks later, and I had to miss for the surgeries. But for the surgeries, I had them on Friday and I was back at work on Monday, and I had to make treatment choices based on making sure I could work. And, I'm sure some of the treatment choices, like if you knew you had no choice, like for instance, the reason it was 5 surgeries is it took them a while to actually get all the cells. So someone was like, well, why don't you just do a double mastectomy? Well, because I'd have to miss way more work.
Yeah, that's an intense surgery.
Yeah. And if it didn't change my prognosis, I needed to miss the least amount of work possible. Right. And so that's my choices. Some of my choices were, and some of my choices, including what type of chemotherapy, were based on choices to try to make sure that I made it to, my daughter's 18th birthday.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're speaking to every single mom that's ever been out there, single working mom who is, the sole breadwinner in the home, right? You have to make those choices, but you had to do it in such an amplified way because now you're not only worried about, being there for her, but being there for the business and all of your clients, right? As well as just living, literally.
Yeah. And it came so quick after, like you didn't really have time to process the divorce, neither of us, and heal from that before you're right into another challenging situation. So, I had to learn a lot from that, and just to narrow my focus down, because if you thought about all of it and it was overwhelming, how do you get out of bed? So it's like, what do I need to do in the next 5 minutes? Let's just focus on what we can, something that doesn't paralyze us, right? And then you find that can apply every day, all the time, right? Because if we're overwhelmed, we're paralyzed. And I unfortunately had to learn that lesson several times before I really got the hang of it.
I'm still learning that lesson. I'm constantly paralyzed by what's going to happen 2 weeks from now. So I totally get it. So how is your health now?
It's good. It's very good. I've been cancer-free since March of 2011. I finished treatment. So yeah. Yay!
Wow.
There's a few other things that I have to deal with because of going through the chemo and having to be on hormone suppressants, but they're very minor compared to, the big C words. So
yeah. So I know that that's not the end of your story though, right? So that's chapter 1. So you make it through this, you go back to work, right? Full time, you're sort of healing. Tell us what happens next.
So I finished cancer treatment in 2011, March of 2011. In August of 2012, my brother suffered a severe traumatic brain injury and he was not supposed to live. And then he was not supposed to ever wake up from a coma. And he did. But then he was never supposed to get out of an institution. And he did. But life was really hard for him, really hard. And 2 years after that, through a lot of, events and trauma, he ended up in a state mental hospital in Oklahoma. And his wife was leaving him. And I don't blame her. It was tough. It was very tough. And she had to make the right decisions, the best decisions for her at that point. But he was going to live the rest of his life in a state mental hospital. And his boys were, in their early 20s at this point, not in a position to be able to help him. And I was the only one that had enough knowledge and could. But my parents, my banker, my financial advisor, they all said that I shouldn't because I would risk losing everything.
Because now you're barely back on your feet, right? From the cancer and from having to take all that time off. Right?
Yes. And my practice is growing, but it's not in a place. I was still the primary veterinarian. I had another veterinarian at that point. I had grown it to a 2-doctor practice, but I'm still the primary doctor. So me stepping out, and he could not be left home alone. If I stepped out to help him, I would have to mostly be out of the practice for a while because he couldn't be home alone while I went to work, 40, 50 hours a week. And so long story short, I did do a lot of, research. I mean, I went to Oklahoma and I took my notebook and I interviewed his psychologist and psychiatrist and his, counselor, and the doctors, poured over the medical records, interviewed my parents because they lived right there, and his wife, to try to figure out, could I help him? And then I was trying to figure out financially, how could I help him? Right. And ultimately, his boss, who had been very, very good to him, his previous boss before the accident, loaned me money to be able to step out of my practice and help him.
Wow. Yep. That's incredible.
The thing is, it was incredible. And I never told my parents because my mother really didn't want me to. And she would have been really upset if she'd have known I borrowed money, right? And so I did step out to help him, but it did get really hard.
Yeah. So did he
Yeah.
move in with you?
I moved him in with me. I checked him out of the state mental hospital. I moved him in with me. Yes. And he didn't have disability at that point. So I had to get him disability. I had to find, doctors and psychiatrists and things to help him with. And, I was responsible for him. It was intense. There were a lot of challenges that you have no idea, what to expect, just some crazy things. Like it's hard to even explain. He had Rex. He disappeared and I had to go find him and just a lot of things. But I was able to get him on disability, get him to the point he almost burned our house down because he left an empty pan on the stove with the stove on. And
traumatic brain injuries are no joke.
No,
I mean, they
no.
it's not, it's not malicious, right?
No.
Yeah.
No, he was doing the best he could with the knowledge and tools he had. And it's us, trying to stay in the place where we can function, not be overwhelmed, and help him. And I was able to help him. I wasn't doing so great at helping me, right? So I got him in his own apartment. I still helped him with bills and different things. And I got him living on his own. And eventually he was able to actually move back to Oklahoma. And that was about 5 years later. But in the process, when I got him to the point where I could go back to work full time, it was tough, because financially it wasn't great, just as predicted, right? And the thing is what I was telling myself at that point.
Tell us more about that.
If I knew then what I know now, it would not have been near as hard, which is one of my passions in what I'm doing now, right? Because if I'd have had those tools, right? But I got overwhelmed and I started, I felt like a loser because it was hard and because I was struggling financially, even though I knew I was supposed to step out and help him. So in that instance, I thought that if it was really hard, it was because I was doing things wrong.
Yeah,
right?
we think life is hard, but we beat ourselves up when it is because we think I should be able to handle anything.
Right. And I should. But the thing is, we can if we learn to think differently. So what I was telling myself is the most crippling thing, but I didn't know that then. So I just felt like a loser. I worked more hours. I worked harder. And yet 3 years after I stepped out to help him, I was almost bankrupt. I was several $100,000s in debt. And it wasn't because we didn't have clients. It wasn't because we didn't have, wasn't a good veterinary practice. It was all the other things that you're trying to figure out and manage. And the challenges that come with stepping out for almost a year, because we did lose some clients and I didn't do a good, because of the space I was in, I wasn't shouting out to the world, I'm back, I'm here, come see me, your first, all the things I know how to do now, right? I wasn't doing. And so 3 years in, when I really assessed, I'm several $100,000s in debt. I've been at this for 3 years. What am I going to do? Am I willing to go bankrupt? Am I willing to walk away from 17 years of practice and the clients that I adore and my patients? And not only that, but I borrowed that money in good faith from my brother's boss. If I went bankrupt, I'm walking away from commitments. And in my ethics growing up, I felt the same way about credit card debt. Like I wasn't even willing to combine the credit card debt because I feel like if they in good faith, that's just my ethics. I'm not criticizing anybody else, but that's the space I was in, which is, I'm grateful that I had that kind of ethics because it gave me enough that even in that feeling to go, you know what? I'm not okay with going bankrupt. I am not. And I didn't know it then. Now I know the neuroscience behind it, the power of making a decision like that. Because before I'm feeling bad, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I feel like I'm a loser, I'm praying for help. It's what I'm telling myself that's blocking the help, right? And this is what we all do. Like, we're like, well, it wasn't meant for us. God didn't mean it for, He's giving it to us. And we can't see it because we don't think it's for us. Because of what we're telling ourselves, we don't even see it to deny it. Because we're like, we're stuck in the problem and we're wallowing in the problem and we're hurting. Once I made a decision, I was determined. I am not going to go bankrupt. So once I made that decision, every day I make that decision again. I am not going to go bankrupt. What am I going to do differently? Because what I'm doing before obviously is not working, right? And so what that does is start to change you towards a more solution-oriented focus. And it's not like I decided it, got up the next day, had a great morning routine, went off to work and had a fantastic day.
And $100,000 came walking through the door.
Didn't work like that. But I will say, before I tell the rest of that story, I will tell you that I went from several $100,000 in debt in 1 year from that decision. 1 year, I was almost out of debt, when I hadn't been able to do it in 3 years prior to that.
And how did you do that?
So the first thing I did was create a morning routine.
So you really focused on mindset.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Because the other tools weren't helping me, right? And what I learned is that mindset is everything. Everything. And there's, a whole bunch of tools. I have people ask me all the time, well, how did you do it? Like, even in a 3-hour webinar, I can't give you all of those tools. One of the reasons I created my new program, which we're going to get to, right?
Yeah.
But I focused on thinking positively. I focused on getting myself in the best place possible in the morning. And of course, what happened initially was, you get yourself in the best place possible. You've figured out this routine. You're doing this stuff. You get to work. And literally, as soon as you walk in the door, within 5 minutes, all the same problems that were there when you were feeling terrible are still there. Somebody's, creditors are calling. How are we going to pay this? How are we going to do that? This is broken, right? And at first, it was really hard to get back to a good space. And that's where consistency is the key. Like the commitment to every single morning, no matter what. If I had a night that was so bad that I couldn't sleep at all, I still, instead of trying to get an hour in before I got up and did my morning routine. And then what I started learning is, if you're having that kind of night, get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and get in that chair, because now you've trained your brain to think differently when you get in that space. And so sometimes that's your key to maybe be able to get a nap is the bed. You haven't got your brain trained what to think in the bed yet, right? And I kept gaining new tools, right? New things to learn that allowed me to do that. But your team starts to become more solution focused as you do, because, part of my morning routine was an appreciation journal done in a specific way. What do I appreciate in others? 3 things. 3 things that I appreciate in life, and 3 things that I appreciate in myself.
And I was recently at a talk you gave, and you had the audience do that, right? Take a few minutes and talk to each other and talk about, like, what do I appreciate in you? What do I appreciate in myself? And that's such a meaningful way to look at life, right? At other people, but also just at your own life. So will you repeat those again?
Yes, I will. And I will say this also. Many of my clients, the hardest part is learning how to appreciate themselves. And they want to focus on big things, and you have to focus on little things. I got out of bed this morning. I got to work on time, or this thing that usually throws me off, I took some deep breaths and I didn't yell, right? Little things. Little things. And if you write it down and you do it every day, what happens is you start doing it in real time, right? Because you're doing it the morning after and you're appreciating yesterday, but then your brain goes, ooh, that was good. I like that I did that. But it also goes to your staff or the people you're working with or whoever's around your family, like, oh, thank you for doing that. Because now, since you're doing it every day, you also appreciate it in others, and you notice the good things coming to you in life. And then you start realizing that you do have value and you do have worth, because when we're beating ourselves up, we take that away, right? I'm not worthy of a solution. I deserve to fail. It's all my fault. I should have done things. I never doubted stepping out to help my brother. I doubted my worthiness, right, for a solution. And it was because we do it to ourselves. Nobody's doing, sure, my mom wasn't happy about it. There was that, but I get to choose how I take that once I understand the tools and principles, right? And this is the thing. So I'm going to share those again. And then for the appreciation journal, and I have it's free on my website too, with a video explaining it, but it's what I appreciate in others, 3 things, what I appreciate in life, 3 things, what I appreciate in myself. 3 things.
That's gorgeous.
Not big things, but little things. And writing it starts to change the tracks in your brain a lot faster. So I still do this. It's still part of my morning routine.
Okay, so you start this morning routine, you're super in debt, and it just starts sort of changing this appreciation, just sort of starts changing the way you see things. Yeah, tell us more about what you did.
I mean, the morning routine, I can't give all the secrets away here, but
I mean, come on. That's what this show is all about. No. Stay tuned later.
But it is about getting yourself in a good mindset. It's the tools to get yourself in the best mindset possible and stop that negative chatter, right? Because it's killing us. What we're telling ourselves is literally what is keeping us from living the lives that we're meant to live and being all of who we're meant to be. And if I don't show up for me, I can't show up for others in the way that I want to. You know, we're taught it's better to give than to receive. It is wonderful to give. It is powerful to give. It is part of our nature to give. But if we don't receive, if we don't let in receiving, we have nothing to give. It really needs to be a flow in, a flow out. Because when you let it in, you have way more to give. You never get empty. You don't go dry. That's what I finally learned. And I learned part of that lesson during cancer treatment, because I had to learn to ask for help so there wasn't more on my child's plate than she already had, right?
Because how old was she when you went through the cancer?
12.
Wow, that's a hard age for that.
Yeah. Well, and there was so many things going on at that point, you know, freshly divorced and all the things that go with that without going into any detail, you know, there was a lot. And so learning to accept help was huge because I wasn't good at that. And many of us are not, because we're taught, no, I got it. No, I'm fine. No, I'm okay. But accepting help is a gift from God, the universe. Love is a gift from God, the universe. And when we let it in, we have more to give. And not only that, but it's a gift to the people giving. Yeah. People want to give and it benefits them just like we want to give. But if we give to people who don't give back, you know, it's exhausting, which is why we need to learn to receive. Because then the relations that we have and the growth that we have and where we live, right? Because if we're giving to people who are giving back, and sure, occasionally there's going to be someone who's in a position where they can't give back in that moment. But when we're generous with receiving and giving, the universe will give us back in another way if we're giving to someone who can't. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And you'll know, because if you're doing good at this part of it, you'll know where that boundary is.
Yeah.
Right? Because you learn it when you stop beating yourself up, honestly.
So you, within a year, get yourself out of all that debt.
Most of it. I was almost out of debt within a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tell us more. What happened then?
So 9 months after that year mark, I made a big cash down payment on my current home. So I sold my house to help my brother and moved into an apartment.
Wow.
Yeah. But the gift is so huge, right? So 9 months later, I made a big cash down payment on my house. And then 4 months after that was the end of another year in business. And I had created $1 million business.
Wow.
So 2 years after being several $100,000 in debt and almost bankrupt, I created $1 million business as a single doctor practice.
Wow. Yeah. I was just about to say, did you like massively scale the business or did you just?
We started learning to work smarter, like not harder. So the struggle that I had initially, and we get told this so many times. So like one of the things that I find we all tend to have limits around is, well, especially women, if we want to be more with our family or we want to, right? We're like, well, I can't have $1 million business because I want to be with my family, or I can't, have whatever level of success. I can only have this much success because I don't want to sacrifice all my time. Well, guess what? If you sacrifice all your time, you usually make less. This is what I learned the hard way. Like we were making no progress when I was just head down working so hard, but I wasn't solution oriented. I wasn't victory oriented. I wasn't, believing in myself oriented. And so what happened was we began to come up with programs that were a win-win for the clients and the practice and the patients, right? And when I started focusing on believing that I wasn't going bankrupt and that we could, get out of this, as I showed up every day, focusing on finding ways to do that and figuring out how to get my mindset back where it needed to be, then you start creating that in your team.
Yeah. And the team had to be incredibly important through all of this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And, some of them, couldn't last through the challenges. When you're in that place for yourself, you're not a very good boss, right? I mean, you do your best. And I have had some employees that worked for me a long time, but there was some that when it got to that point, it was tough, right? And so I don't fault them. I wasn't in the place. I didn't understand. I didn't see. What I'm grateful for is the opportunity to gain all of those tools, to understand it for the rest of my life, and to have the opportunity to share it with others, which became, because I really went through another challenge pretty much right after that, actually during that time, and really big challenge. And I used all those tools because I said, I'm not going back to that place. Then it was like, they work. I can name them. I can outline them. I know I'm supposed to give these to others, right? Because in the end, I lost my brother in October of last year. And what I really thought was, who would I be if I had listened to all the authorities, the banker, financial advisor, my parents, and I left him in the mental hospital? Who would I be if every day I woke up knowing I was the one with the knowledge to help him, and I didn't? And he lived in that terrible place for 10 years. Who would I be? And who do I get to be? Because as hard as it was, I was willing to step up and help him. But who I get to be now is someone I never could have been without that. But I want other people to have that choice. There's so many people, it affects their health. It affects so much when they feel like everybody says I can't. So even though in my heart and soul, I feel like God's telling me to, but everybody says I can't. And so I can't. And then that's eating at them all the time. Every time they pick up the phone, and even if they choose not to call because their guilt is too big, then you feel guilty about that, right? What does that do to your physical health? What does that do to your mental health? And we have a society of that because we spend so much time in a situation where we're taught to live from the outside in. So we're supposed to take that advice, and we don't have the tools to do it differently. We don't have the tools that I learned that allowed me to start listening to my intuition and believing in solutions and knowing they were going to show up and then seeing them when they showed up. I mean, solutions can show up in junk mail, and there's neuroscience behind it. I love that. I mean, I'm a doctor, so of course.
The nerdier, the better. Tell me the stats.
Well, I didn't used to understand, when I started doing it, I didn't understand the neuroscience. But when you can teach it from the neuroscience, you have the opportunity to get more people to understand that it isn't just woo-woo. There's actually neuroscience and what you're doing to your brain and what happens to your brain when you're stressing and you're anxious and you're not believing in solutions, and anytime you're anxious or worried, at that point in time, you're not believing in solutions. You are wallowing in the problem. And just understanding that is huge, because if you realize where you are, now you can do something about it.
What's the number one way that people can shift themselves out of that when they find themselves spinning into, kind of sitting in their dirty diaper, worry and remorse? And not that I was feeling like that earlier today or anything. And I'm secretly asking you because I could use your advice on that.
Well, you know what? Honestly, I think a consistent morning routine is you got to get ahead before life is throwing things at you. If you get up and already your children or your spouse or the email or the social media, if you're seeing that or hearing that or in that before you've got yourself in a good place, then it profoundly affects, because you're already getting bounced around. And the most powerful time is to get yourself in that space before that. You have more bounce back. You have more resilience when it's coming at you when you've already done that. And I think the thing that made the biggest difference for me was that consistency, and still makes a big difference. And I notice because, you'll get to thinking, oh, I'm rock star awesome and I got this. And you're like in a hurry and you don't. And then you're like, yeah. And the results reflect that. It's not something that you can just take in. Life is coming at you. The world is coming at you. Something that one of the things that made it really hard for me for a long time was I thought if it got hard or challenges came your way, that meant you were doing something wrong. And I learned that as a child, and I also learned as a child that I was responsible for other people's emotions and choices, because that's how it was in my childhood growing up. My parents were doing the best they could with the knowledge and tools they had. I'm sure they learned the same thing, right? But those two things really leave us very poorly equipped to handle life, right? Because you can't be responsible for anybody's emotions, actions, or choices but your own. And we take on, and then because we feel responsible for them and we can't fix them, they're still unhappy, then we feel like a failure. We're telling ourselves all these things. And to really, truly stop that negative voice in our head, we have to recognize it, right? So the appreciation journal really helps you start, because if you do it consistently, you're going to start hearing what you say to yourself. And then you can change it. But when you say it to yourself, you need to reframe it, not just laugh at it, but actually reframe it, right? In that moment. And, I got to where I had some of these almost out of body experiences, like, you're at home by yourself and you're allowing stress to get to you and you're just losing it. Like, I can't find something when I'm cooking, but I'm feeling under pressure, and then I'm outside having an out of body. Look at you. How's this working out for you? You finding that lid yet? Yeah. How long are you going to let this go on?
Not that I've ever been there, like yesterday. No.
Seriously, right? And I think it's important to be honest about that, right? But the more that I do that and I'm calling myself on it, then the more I'm able to not even get to that place. Like, own it sooner and do something different in the moment, and recognize that there's never any solution that's going to happen when I'm in that space. So for veterinary medicine, we work with adults that will, I was reading something today. What did they call it? There's co-regulation and then there's dysregulation.
Yeah.
Co-regulation is when you can regulate, like you have a spouse and they see it and they're able to calm you down. Or your child is losing it and you are able to calm them down. And that's really important because children learn their regulation from that. Well, I didn't get all of that. And because, if if the adults in your,
yeah.
So I can say, unfortunately, my child didn't always have it either because I didn't have it. I had dysregulation at times where you just lose it and you're out of control. That's dysregulation. And I'm like, oh, there's a name for it. Like when you lose it and you can't get it back, right? But we have it happen with clients, right? And if you grew up with that, sometimes the hardest part is if somebody's yelling, in your case, in your childhood, that meant things were going to happen that weren't good, right? And so now, how do you control yourself, right? And so we have to learn new things. And these are some of the things that cause some of the things we're dealing with as adults, right? And like, oh, when I was losing it over the pots and pans, that was dysregulation. When my client is yelling at me on the phone and I can't have a conversation to help him, that's dysregulation. Putting a name to it sort of gives it a little more distance, which is really helpful for yourself, right? And then there's tools that you can use if it's somebody else yelling at you to get you back in your space. But I thought that was interesting because many of us have learned it. Let's face it, everybody doing the best they can, there's still a lot of dysfunction, right? And whatever our dysfunction was in the past, you can't go back and redo it. So if we stay beating ourselves up about it, we stay in that space and we're unable to help others with it. Like if I'm in that space, then I stay in a place where I can't share it and help other people, right? Because I want to pretend it's not there. If I want to grow and change, I have to own it. And I have to say I'm not perfect now, right? Because if you're not real with yourself, you can't get to where you want to go, right? It's like telling yourself you're in Phoenix when you're really in Dallas, but you want to go to Kansas City. Well, how's that roadmap going to work out for you? It's the same thing with relationships, finances, business. You have to own where you are. That day that I sat down and said, what are you going to do about it? Yeah. This is where you are. You've done all these things and you haven't really sat down and said, where am I? And this is where I am. And what am I going to do at this point?
Yeah. So you build the business back up and now you're coaching. So tell us a little bit more. Are you still actively a veterinarian or are you still working in that business?
So I sold my practice because I couldn't own a practice and grow a practice and build what I knew I was called to do.
Yeah.
That's too much.
Yeah. And you have such a great story of being a heart-centered entrepreneur who just realizes like, oh my gosh, I've had this huge life change, this huge change in how I think and see the world. All I want to do is teach it.
Well, in the veterinary medicine, my favorite part is still the heart-centered part. It's working with the clients and patients. To grow the practice and grow the business, that requires stepping away and doing more administration and growth and the things that weren't heart-centered for me.
Yeah, I get that every day. I think about that every day in my business, right? How do I grow this thing, but still get to do this, right? To still get to be across the table.
Because it's really important to nurture ourselves, right? I decided that I would sell my practice, but still do veterinary medicine because there's a huge need to fill in, do relief work or work part-time. And so it allows me to do my favorite part of veterinary medicine, which is working with the staff, the clients, and the doctors, and then spend my other time. So when I walk out of a practice, I'm not responsible for any of the other things, right? So then I can go do my new stuff.
So I know even though you've left veterinary medicine, that I know that's where your heart is. Can you bring what you're teaching now into the veterinary world?
Isn't it funny? Because at first I thought I couldn't. But then, veterinary medicine has one of the highest suicide rates of any profession. And that's not just in the United States, that's all over the world. And so we need this message. There are a lot of veterinarians that struggle with mental health and mindset. And so at first, I thought, well, if I was going to bring it, I would want to bring it to continuing education meetings. But right now, a lot of the veterinarians, even when we now have some wellness tracks, we've finally got some approved and we're starting to track that way, they don't go, they send their practice manager. So that is part of what now has become part of my passion, right? And so I got the opportunity to speak to some students actually in hospitality at Oklahoma State University, but I had met at the fall conference last year because that was our 30-year class reunion. I met the director of CE for the veterinary school. And so I reached out to her and said, hey, if any of your students would like to come, I'm speaking over here. Well, she reached back out and asked me if I would speak at the fall conference. And so I now have 3 hours of continuing education on mental health and mindset. I've also gotten my compassion fatigue professional certification, which now includes veterinary medicine, in order to be able to have backing for teaching that, right? So now I'm creating continuing education hours that will be certified for veterinary medicine. And my goal is, and I just got invited to, and you have to have got a reference, and I got accepted to join an association called Vet Partners, which is all the consultants in the veterinary world. And it's a nonprofit. It's sort of like self-regulation, like to have ethics standards and protocols in place and help each other. And it's a great place to be in a place to support the veterinary community in this new aspect. So it's still, we don't even have a committee yet for it. So that's something that I'm brainstorming with some other, including the doctor that I met actually through LinkedIn, but went to Oklahoma State also and was just a couple of classes behind me. And so she's already there and on a committee, and we're figuring out, how do we have a committee that's really focused on mindset? Because there are a few other veterinarians that are doing this as well and coaching with the goal of really, I want our profession to succeed at the highest levels in terms of joy and happiness and not committing suicide. And again, clients are very attached to their pets, so they can sometimes, just like all the other things we were talking about, have emotions that come into play and say things. And then other clients play on those emotions if you see it on social media, and things can get spread that are really painful and not really the true version. And so we can't stop those things. We've got to build resilience from the inside. It's just my passion to give that tool back to my profession the same way I want to give it to others, because I'm so grateful to have them now. I lived a long time without them and life was really hard, and now it's just my absolute passion to get to share them with others and watch others thrive and grow with these tools.
Yeah. So tell us more about what you're doing for the coaching. I know you've got a new program. Tell us about that.
So my new program, which relates to the story, right? Bankruptcy to $1 Million Business. And it really is all of the tools that I used, not only to get from bankruptcy to $1 Million Business, but those tools changed my life outside of the business life. And really to have the heart and soul, to joyfully have a successful business, it's from the inside out, right? And we can create way more income when we're doing what we love and are passionate about, and our business lines up with our passion and purpose. So mine did for a long time. And then when it didn't, but I have had so many people ask me, tell us how you did it. Well, I can't give you 3 sentences and tell you how I went from bankrupt to $1 Million Business. But this program, it's got 8 modules, has 8 pre-recorded modules, but I'm also doing 8 live weekly sessions. So you get the pre-recorded module, and then there's a live call where we'll, spend like 30 minutes going over the material in the module, and then 30 minutes for questions and coaching, because it's a way to as many people as possible to have this information, because it is life-changing, and it's life-changing forever. So those modules will be available, forever, unless something really crazy happens. But it's not like they're going to go away at a certain distance, like after a year you don't have access, or as long as I can make them available, they will be available. But there is a whole bunch of extra tools besides that we've included in that package. There is a Facebook community, because one of the things that I learned, and I did figure out how to get mentors myself, even in that place of being really broke, you find a payment plan in a program, because I wasn't doing well by myself. And I didn't want to be that same place anymore. I'd already done it for years, 3 years in that particular space. But it's not like there weren't challenges prior to that I was ready to be done with, So that's my goal, is to share it and pass it on, and to share my particular tools that got me in 1 year from bankruptcy to almost out of debt, and in 2 years to creating $1 Million Business. And there is also a bonus call with Kate Butler, who is a multi-7-figure entrepreneur, publisher, and many times international bestselling author. But hers is $1 Million Year. So how to create your $1 Million Year. And so there's a whole bonus session on that. And if they sign up, there is also a free bonus call, one-on-one coaching call, 1 hour one-on-one coaching call with me as well, as part of that program.
That's incredible. So if they want to sign up, how do people find it?
So actually that program is available on every one of my social media link trees, but also drlucette.net.
Okay, great. And what is your social media handles?
Dr. Lucette in most of the places, or Lucette Beall, Beall. But you can find me on Facebook and Instagram under Dr. Lucette. TikTok, I think that's Dr. Lucette as well. And I have a YouTube channel, which has a lot of videos, a lot of, short and long form. TikTok has a lot of short form, because my goal is just to get my message out there, and that have people get to live that with that freedom, because that's the thing. Once you have these tools, there is a freedom. And part of that freedom is really knowing deep down in your soul, you're 100% responsible for your emotions, actions, and choices, but you have 0% responsibility for anybody else's. And when you can truly operate from that and be able to recognize in real time when you're taking responsibility for somebody else and not feeling good, or when you've given somebody else your power, or an event, or, we'll say, well, the economy is bad and that's why this is not working. We're giving our power away to something we can't do anything about, when we could actually, there is a solution. There is a solution to every single challenge out there. And if we can learn that and learn to take it into our heart and soul, which is what this program is about, is all the tools to be able to really know that in your soul, so that when you find yourself thinking those thoughts or letting somebody else tell you stuff and you're taking it in, you're like, wait, is that true? And your brain will make up stuff. You will have somebody didn't call you or somebody didn't respond, right? And then what do we start doing? We start, without even realizing that's what we're doing, right? We start telling ourselves, oh, well, they didn't do it because they're mad at me or they don't like me. And you can create this whole scenario. You can create it and not realize that your brain created it and actually go tell somebody else that and create this whole drama scene. And you don't even know that it wasn't true. Our brains are very tricky because they're always trying to figure things out and they go on autopilot. 95% of our thoughts are repetitive autopilot thoughts. 80% of those are negative. So owning and learning how to recognize those and what I call keep your brain in the game instead of going down that autopilot is also a huge game changer.
Well, thank you so much for being on our show. And I can't wait to take the course.
Ooh,
Perfect. Thanks.
thank you.